Hello, welcome to this interview for the Charlotte Living Archives. My name is Joshua Johnson. Could you, for the record, introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Hadia Mubarak. I'm an assistant professor of religion at Queen's University of Charlotte.
It's nice to meet you.
Same here. Very good to meet you.
Just to get us into the idea of what Charlotte is, where is currently, would you consider Charlotte to be your home?
Currently, yeah, that's kind of complicated. I reside in Charlotte. My hometown, where I grew up, is Panama City, Florida. And but I moved here in 2015, and I've been raising my kids here. So I think, yes, we are now Charlotteans.
And were you born in Panama City?
No, I was born in Trenton, New Jersey, and then I moved to Panama City when I was 3 years old.
And how would you say that experience has been different from the experience of living in Panama or Trenton to the experience of living in Charlotte?
Yeah, so Charlotte is unique. So just to kind of add to that timeline, I guess, if you will, I also lived in DC, in the DC suburbs, for about 10 years. So when I graduated from college in 2003, I moved to Washington, D.C. to start my master's degree. Then I ended up doing my PhD also in the same university, Georgetown University. So it was a different experience, obviously. Like DC from Panama City was huge difference. And then moving to Charlotte. Charlotte is kind of in between the big city feel of DC and then in between the small city feel of Panama City. Something kind of in the middle, I'd say.
Sort of just to jump into our main points, how would you describe the experience in the last 2 years dealing with and kind of experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, obviously it was different for everybody. For me personally, there was a lot of unpredictability, uncertainty. At the time, I had just received a book contract to finish my book, which I don't know if it shows or not. That's the book cover. And I was really, really worried about getting it done with my kids at home. And so that created just a lot of anxiety in my end. At the same time, I wasn't worried, I think, about the kind of things that most people were worried about. I think I know there were some people who felt like, oh my gosh, the world's coming to an end, or kind of the sense of urgency. I think my faith in God kept me kind of strong. And I was like, God is testing us. Like, God tests people in different ways. My parents are from the Middle East originally. So I think, being from the Middle East and knowing that people go through really turbulent times like war or, I kind of had just a different way of thinking of it. I felt like it was going to be temporary. We're going to get over it. But we just have to be strong and deal with the logistics of here now. And that was my attitude. For my kids, I felt like they needed to be in school. So I decided to switch my daughter to a private school that was actually opening that fall of 2020. So the fall of 2020, she was actually at an in-person school, which was very rare for most people at that time. But I felt like it was important to support her education. And actually, now I think I did the right thing. A lot of statistics are telling us that kids have been falling so far behind because they were virtual.
Going into the experience you had working on your book, how did the COVID-19 experience sort of modulate? How did it change from working on your book pre-pandemic to post to during the pandemic and post-pandemic?
Yeah. Well, I was also teaching too at the same time, and actually I joined Queen's University in the fall of 2020. Was my first time teaching. Of course, we were completely online. So that made my transition to Queen's really unique because I didn't go through the same orientation everyone else did. So when we finally opened up and I was back in person, it was like, oh, we actually have a copy machine. It's here. We actually have a work study room here. We have a faculty lounge, all these things I had no idea, the standard things that you would tell a new faculty member. I kind of had to learn on the go because I didn't have an actual orientation in person. But at the same time, it did make things easier to some extent. We were all online at the time. I got to meet a bunch of faces on like little black cubes on my computer. But to answer your question, so before pandemic, I could rely on my kids having a really fixed schedule, and I could, you know, use those hours. But obviously, all our routine just got disrupted by the pandemic. So then I just had to find time wherever I could, and that's what made things more challenging.
Um, During the experience at the height of the pandemic, ha- um, how would you say that your normal routines were affected? Especially like you mentioned with your kids and the changes that went from basically your normal life
Yeah.
to the experience of working in the pandemic.
Yeah, well, I would say the biggest disruption where it was like religious rituals. For example, Fridays we have Friday prayer. We go to the mosque and we, celebrate. Like we not celebrate. Sorry, we pray in congregation on Friday. It's actually obligatory for males, Muslim males, to attend, and for women it's optional. And I used to, take my kids. That stopped. Obviously, there was no more Friday services, congregation services at the mosque. We had, I'm trying to think if I was teaching Sunday school or not at the time, but that also went virtual for a period of time. And also, I remember the big thing was Ramadan. So now we're in the month of Ramadan. I am fasting today. And Ramadan, one of the big things is at night we go to the mosque for nightly prayers. And that month, I remember it was in March. Well, Ramadan now is starting in March. So back then in 2020, like the pandemic hit right before Ramadan started, and then Ramadan started, and no one could go to the mosque. No one could break their fast together, and that was a huge, huge difference. And then at the culmination of the month of fasting, there's a huge religious holiday called Eid, and we usually go to the mosque and celebrate. And so we couldn't do that. So what we did was my husband's brother-in-law did a Friday sermon online, and all the family just joined online on Zoom, and we all just like from our homes kind of joined on Zoom like for the holiday, right? And he did like his religious sermon. Like we actually went through the things that you would say and do at the mosque service, but we did it like just all in our homes on Zoom, which was really unique, very, very interesting.
Is this the first time since the COVID pandemic that you'll be able to do the service in person, or did you do it last year?
No, last year we were in person, yeah.
How would you say that, given the sort of like how COVID shocked and rocked the world in many facets, how have you kind of like, how has traditions sort of changed? How have these gatherings of people sort of changed to reflect sort of like the impact that something like the COVID-19 pandemic had?
Yeah. I think now the mosques are back to usual. I was there, not last night but the night before, and everybody's so like clothed, like in Muslim tradition, like the prayers you stand like shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot. You're that close to people and you have to make a straight line all the way across. So you're very, very closely, tightly knit as a community and like even physically, right? The way you're standing. So during the pandemic, that obviously changed and everybody had to stand, like even when the mosques reopened, everybody had to stand 6 feet apart, people masked. There was all these changes that happened. People had to put their shoes in bags and not put them on the shoe shelf and just hold on to their shoes. People had to bring their own prayer mats from home so that you're not prostrating your face on the carpet where everyone else did. Actually, they used to, in this one specific mosque, they used to give you these plastic prayer sheets, and then you could hold on to them or or throw them away. They were recyclable. But now, things have really gone back to normal in most mosques. Yeah. People still though like to bring their own prayer rug, though I noticed.
Is masking still common within?
Sometimes, yeah, I'll see some people, but not that many people, just a few. Yeah.
What are some good things that you've learned through the experience of the COVID-19? Things that you lived through that you didn't necessarily believe that was going to stick around, but have kind of just like, what are some experiences from the COVID-19 pandemic that have stuck around?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think definitely I adopted better hygiene. I became so conscious of like not touching my face at all with my hands, and that has stayed. And that's something I pass on to my kids. I'm like, just don't touch your face. Don't put your fingers in your mouth. If people didn't touch your mouth and nose and eyes when they're outside, we wouldn't like put these germs in our bodies as quickly or as often. So that's better hygiene. Definitely stayed with me. Also, there were some services I started to use that I continue to use, like Instacart, not for grocery shopping. I just found like, you know what, like sometimes I don't have time to go to the store. I'll just use Instacart. Just do what I can to facilitate my life. Even doing most of my shopping on Amazon, not going to stores as frequently. I think overall, though, like COVID-19, that pandemic just kind of it cultivated resilience in all of us, and I think that resilience hopefully is still there.
Uh, as of right now, it's been just over 3 years since the COVID-19 pandemic officially started in March. How would you say that your life has changed, like in aggregate? How from 2023 March, I mean 2020 March to 2023 March, how much would you say your life has changed?
Yeah. I mean, I'm very, very blessed. I didn't lose anyone close to me, so I'm very blessed in that regard. I know that others haven't been, as fortunate in that way. I did attend one funeral of the brother of a good friend who passed away from COVID. He was only 35, and he had left behind the 6-month-old baby, like 6 months or 3 months, and that was really hard to go to. I went to the funeral and just seeing the child there at the funeral and knowing that she's going to grow up without her dad. It was really, really, really tragic. But personally, for me, like I said, I didn't lose anyone close to me, so I'm very blessed, and I'm very aware of being blessed in that way. So very, very grateful to God for that. I would say that the biggest change, honestly, like I felt very strongly at the time that we needed to cope. We needed to do with it, whatever we had to do to make things work out. So like I said, I went and found private schools for my kids and put them in those schools. So I think, and then, I had the advantage of teaching online. So I would say I learned the skill of teaching online. I learned, it's still not ideal. I still am teaching an asynchronous course. But I think we learned that maybe there are some things that are better online. So, until today, like some of our faculty meetings are online. We realize like, okay, we don't always have to bring people physically to a room. Although I think for teaching, like teaching happens much more effectively if people can be in a classroom. So I think humans, we just convey this energy, and that same energy is not like conveyed through a screen.
Would you say that religion and God has been a big part of your life? How has your relationship with God changed or altered over the course of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, if anything, I found more faith in the pandemic because it was like the way, again, my paradigm was that this is God. Like anything that happens in the natural world, I feel like is a creation of God. Like God's creating this in our event in our life, and I believe as a monotheist, as someone who takes God very my belief of God is as one who is very kind of hands on in this world, right? So I believe that God speaks to us through our experiences, and that we're to learn lessons. We're not just to ignore them. And so when the experience of the pandemic happened, I was like, okay, like this is a wake up call for all of us, for humanity, that we need to remember God. We need to remember people who are less fortunate than us. We can't be wasteful. We need to this is just like a wake up call that, you know, don't take things for granted. Don't like assume life is always going to be the way we're used to it being. So if anything, I think it strengthened my faith because it made me think about like, okay, I need to take time to reflect. God's telling us like, don't take things for granted, and I need to reflect. And I think it was a time of reflection for me.
Right here, we have a report saying that on average, there were 68 cases reported in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, which is just a 39% decrease over the last 2 weeks. In general, would you say you are a happier person having gone through the trials and tribulations of the COVID pandemic, going from seeing hundreds of thousands of people get COVID to only seeing handfuls, and how do you think that has made you do you believe that has made you a stronger person to weather that storm?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think it's made me a stronger person, more resilient, more having more faith in God. You know, going through that experience. I think you know, in America we've been very very blessed. I think it's important to take into consideration that we live in a first world country where vaccines were very accessible, and very affordable. I mean, we didn't have to pay anything really for most of us. With health insurance took care of it, medical insurance, and so I think it's important for us to recognize the privilege we had because other countries didn't overcome the pandemic as quickly as we did, and we're not able to go to a life of normality as quickly as we did. So I think it's important for us to recognize our privilege and our positions of privilege, and to then do something about it. So for me, it's not just a pandemic, but it's a question of like, what do I do with the privilege that we have? I think we have to be, in general, like more conscientious consumers, not wasteful of water, not wasteful of food. I think Queens can do a lot more. I mean, we're at Queens University. I think Queens University could do a lot more to reduce the food waste that happens, all sorts of waste of energy with, the way this heating and cooling system works. All this is connected, because I don't think of the pandemic as an isolated event. I think it brought to the surface the way like global inequities play out, and just our responsibility to do something about it.
And if you could leave anyone with a message that you received during the that you've learned through the pandemic, what would that message be?
I would say don't freak out, don't panic. When our normalcy is disrupted, it's for a good thing. Sometimes what we consider normal, maybe it's not good. Maybe we're doing things without being reflective, without being attentive. We're just kind of like almost working like robots, right? And taking things for granted. So when things are so massively disrupted the way they were, I think they can be reasons for good to reflect on, okay, what do we need to do differently in our lives? So that would be the message that I would share.
Thank you for taking time to talk to us today, Dr. Mubarak.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.